She wasn't hunted by humans. She was hunted by her own kind, because of the unborn child inside her, a pregnant Bigfoot, bleeding through the forest, running from the only creatures who should have protected her. But Liam, he didn't raise a weapon. He saw her, truly saw her, in a single moment of eye contact, deep in the night, with blood on the ground and terror in her breath. What Liam discovered changed everything. A hybrid no one believed possible. A species trying to erase its own mutation. And a secret buried in silence for decades. In the footage Liam captured, you'll hear the steel traps snap. You'll hear the scream of something not quite beast, not quite human. And if you think it's just another myth, you'd better watch now, before this truth disappears for another 100 years. Under the thick breath of an October morning, the forest held its secrets in a silence so absolute it throbbed. Pines stood sentinel, cloaked in mist that clung to their limbs like mooring veils. Locals never came this far west, not past the fallen sign that read Logging Road 23, half swallowed by moss and time. They said the shadows here remembered things. They said the trees whispered back. Liam knelt by a muddy stream, eyes narrowed. There it was again, a print, massive, pressed deep into the wet soil. 5 toes, not human, not bare, not anything that should walk this close to the living. He brushed a finger along its edge, where a few coarse hairs were stuck to the rim. They shimmered silver-brown in the dull light. His breath caught, not from fear, but something colder, older, recognition. It matched nothing he'd studied, but still, it felt familiar, like déjà vu soaked in blood. There'd been signs for days now. Birds flying lower than usual, deer trails veering wide around nothing. Last night, he'd heard it. A low, dragging sound beneath the wind. Heavy, limping. And now this track, wounded, close. October 17, 6:42 a.m., found another print near Old Creek. Limping, possibly injured. The pencil trembled in his grip as he scribbled into the corner of his weathered notebook. He didn't know why he still kept it. Maybe for proof. Maybe for the ghosts. But something about the air shifted then. Just slightly. A change in the way the fog moved. Like it was following someone, not settling on the earth. He rose to his feet slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. The rifle at his back remained untouched, because this time, it wasn't about the hunt. He remembered his father's last message on the ham radio. The one that cut out mid-sentence 13 years ago. There's something out. Static. A scream muffled by wind. Then nothing. People said it was a cougar. Liam had seen the wrecked gear. Cougars didn't twist metal like that. The trail before him wound deeper into the brush, veiled by ferns and fog. And yet, there was a pull now. Not curiosity, not revenge, something raw. Instinct, maybe. Or guilt. He took a step forward, then another. The forest didn't answer. But it didn't stop him either. And somewhere, just beyond where the light could reach, something else moved, limping, watching, leaving a trail not just of blood, but of something more fragile. Hope, perhaps. But that wasn't a word Liam believed in yet. Not then. He only knew this. Whatever was bleeding out there, it wasn't alone. The moon hung low and swollen over the treetops like a silent eye, casting pale light across the clearing where they had gathered. A ring of giant figures stood motionless, barely distinguishable from the trees that surrounded them, their massive bodies cloaked in shadow. Not a word was spoken. Their law did not live in language. It lived in silence, in tradition, in the weight of every step that came before. And tonight, tradition demanded judgment. She stood at the center, barefoot, trembling, belly round with life not yet born. Her breath came in ragged pulls, but she held her chin high, not defiant, not proud, just determined. The elder stepped forward, his fur streaked with silver, his eyes as old as the soil beneath them. One hand reached toward her, not in comfort, but to expose the truth. A single claw traced a path just above her stomach. The others inhaled sharply, a sound like wind through dry leaves. She didn't cry out. Instead, she lowered her gaze and uncurled her fingers, revealing a scrap of bark. The shape burned into it was simple. 2 eyes. One large, one human. A mark older than their stories. Older than fear. No one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, they turned their backs to her. Shoulders squared. Heads forward. The final sentence, not exile by force, but something colder. The ritual of vanishing. She no longer existed, not to them. For a moment, the clearing seemed to tilt, as if the weight of that silence had pushed the world sideways. She stood alone. The space where community had been now a hollow she couldn't fill. Then the wind changed. Carried on it was a low, distant sound. Half breath, half sob. Hers. She stumbled back, one hand clutching the base of a tree for balance. Behind her, the moonlight caught the edge of something carved into the bark. Deep gouges, in an old language only she remembered. She pressed her forehead to it like a goodbye. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a wolf cried, and she began to walk, not because she had a place to go, but because standing still meant turning to stone. She didn't know that hours later, a human would find her trail. Didn't know what the future would demand of him, only this. Her child would not die nameless in the woods, but the forest did not forget so easily. And neither did those who watched from the shadows, unseen, still listening. She moved through the trees like a ghost stitched together by moonlight and pain. Each step left a deeper impression in the dirt, her legs trembling under the growing weight of what she carried. The cold clung to her fur now, not like mist, but like judgment. And behind her, no footsteps followed, not even whispers. They had made sure of that. The silence of her kind was louder than any scream. She passed through a thicket of alder branches scraping her shoulders, drawing thin red lines across her skin that burned like the memory of stairs turned away. Her breath came in sharp gasps, clouds of steam curling around her jaw. Somewhere far off, a raven called once, then fell silent, as if it too had been warned to forget her name. Memories came like broken glass, flickering between the trees. A flash of yellow eyes in the dark. A hand, larger than hers, resting briefly on her belly before vanishing like smoke. She had never seen his face, only the shape of him, only the way he had not spoken. But he'd stayed the night, and that was enough for them to call it defilement. The wind pressed harder now, a soundless wall trying to push her back. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not with the pulse beneath her ribs growing stronger, a small and steady thrum that was no longer only hers. The ache in her side sharpened, flaring each time her foot met frozen ground. Still, she climbed. By the time she reached the ridge, dawn had not yet broken, but the horizon glowed faintly with the first hints of iron light. Below, the forest stretched like an ocean, endless, indifferent. She paused there, body swaying, one hand pressed against the trunk of a cedar whose bark had been clawed long ago with symbols even she couldn't read. That was when the scent hit her. Metal, oil, burned powder. Man. She turned sharply, her eyes wide, but the scent was old. A place he had passed through, not where he waited. She stepped back, then slipped on the wet moss. A stifled cry escaped her throat as her knee struck rock. Then came the sound, sharp, cruel, a snap. Not from her bones, from the earth itself. A trap. The pain bloomed instantly, white-hot and ragged, and her scream ripped through the morning like something ancient waking up. She fell to the ground, one leg twisted, blood spilling fast over rusted steel. For a moment, the sky above her swirled. She reached for the trees. They didn't reach back, but something had heard. Something far off had paused and begun to turn. The scream echoed like something torn from the bones of the forest itself, scattering crows into a black cloud overhead. Liam heard it before he saw anything. Just a ragged wail, raw and full of something too wild to name. He froze mid-stride, the frost-crusted underbrush crunching beneath his boots, rifle still slung but forgotten. For a moment, the whole forest seemed to hold its breath. He moved toward the sound, not because he meant to. His legs simply decided before his mind did. The terrain sloped sharply, rocks slick with moss, branches clawing at his jacket like frantic fingers. Then through the break in the trees he saw her. She was sprawled in the dirt, massive frame shuddering, one leg caught fast in a metal trap. Blood had pooled beneath her, dark and glistening against the dead leaves. Her fur, thicker than a bear's, coarse like woven bark, was soaked through with sweat and fear. And her eyes, not just animal, not just pain. There was memory in them, intelligence, recognition. For the briefest second, he raised the rifle. Instinct, years of hate, hardwired into his bones. But then she turned her head and looked at him, not with threat, but plea. Not a sound escaped her, but the weight of that gaze was heavier than any growl. He lowered the barrel. She tried to move, but the trap had sliced deep, and the effort sent a fresh wave of blood into the dirt. Liam stepped forward, hands lifted, slowly, like approaching a cliff edge. She didn't flinch. The trap had rusted shut in places, and it took everything he had not to scream when his fingers slipped on blood-slick metal. But after several grunts and a prayer he hadn't uttered since boyhood, it sprang open with a crack. Her leg dropped free. She didn't bolt, just lay there, chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts. Liam backed away, hands still up, but as he turned to go, she made a sound. Not loud, more vibration than voice. A low, guttural note that stopped him mid-step. He turned back. Her gaze was locked on him again. And in that silence between them, something passed. Not fear, not gratitude. Something older, something binding. He knew he couldn't leave her there. Not with the scent of blood drifting up like a beacon. Not when he'd just seen the thing everyone said didn't exist. Look at him like he was the only thing standing between her and death. So he knelt, looped his arms beneath her shoulders, and began to drag her, slow, agonizing inches, back toward his cabin, where no one was supposed to find him. But the forest never forgets its debts, and nothing stays hidden forever. By the time they reached the cabin, Liam's arms were shaking, lungs raw from cold and effort. The sun was beginning to bleed through the trees, casting streaks of pale fire across the forest floor. She had gone nearly silent by then, too weak to groan, her breath raspy but steady, her weight heavier than anything he'd ever carried, not just in muscle and fur, but in the strangeness of her. He laid her down just inside the doorway, careful not to let her leg bump the frame. The trap had mangled it badly. Bone hadn't broken, but the flesh, God, the flesh was torn open like fabric, frayed and swollen. He paused only a second to catch his breath. Then, without speaking, he crossed to the shelves along the far wall. The tin basin, the alcohol, a roll of bandages so old the paper cracked when he unwrapped them. He returned to her side, kneeling slowly, deliberately placing the supplies down beside her like offerings. Her eyes, dim now, fogged with pain, tracked every motion. She didn't move, didn't growl. That unsettled him more than if she had. He poured the alcohol into the basin and dipped the cloth. The smell was sharp enough to sting his own eyes. When the wet fabric touched her leg, her entire body jerked, an involuntary flinch that nearly knocked over the basin. Liam steadied her gently, murmuring something without realizing, just air shaped like comfort. He worked fast, fingers trembling but precise. Years of fixing his own wounds and silence came back to him. She didn't cry out again, though her breath hitched and stuttered. He wrapped the leg tightly, layer after layer, until the bleeding slowed. She watched him the whole time, not with suspicion, not with gratitude, just a kind of quiet resignation that made his chest twist. He brought water next, holding the tin cup out toward her. For a moment, he wasn't sure if she'd understand, but slowly, hesitantly, she reached out, cradling the cup with both massive hands. Her lips parted. The water vanished in 2 gulps. She held it out again. That's when he noticed the tremor in her fingers. Not from pain, but exhaustion. No one this strong should shake like that. No one should ever have been left to bleed in the dirt. He stepped back, dragging a blanket off the cot, laying it gently over her form. She flinched once, but didn't pull away, and as he sat across from her, hands still stained with her blood, Liam realized something was shifting, not just inside her, inside him. The boundaries Hyde clung to, man, monster myth. They were dissolving like mist at the edge of dawn. But dawn hadn't broken yet, and something in the trees still watched, waiting. Morning crept in slow and gray, seeping through the tiny window panes and crawling along the wooden floor like mist without breath. Liam hadn't slept. He sat slouched in the corner chair, arms crossed tight across his chest, boots still dusted with dried blood and dirt. Across from him, the creature, no, not creature, not now, lay bundled in the old wool blanket, her breathing a low, steady rhythm, uneven but alive. Every few minutes, her foot twitched, a reflex or a memory of pain. He watched that movement like it was language. The fire had gone out hours ago, leaving the cabin chilled and quiet. Outside, birds stirred. Inside, Liam studied the curve of her brow, the slope of her jaw. There was something almost maternal about the way she cradled her own stomach in sleep, protective, instinctual. He hadn't seen it the night before, or hadn't let himself. But now, in the calm of dawn, the shape of her midsection told a different story. He whispered to no one. "You're pregnant." The words felt ridiculous in the air. Heavy, human. But truth didn't care about language, and as soon as he said it, he couldn't unsee it. The way she held herself, the tremor in her limbs, the impossible gentleness in how she breathed, like she was trying not to disturb something beneath her ribs. It hit him harder than he expected. He stood and paced. The boards creaked underfoot. He poured water from the kettle. The clink of metal, a jarring sound in the hush. She stirred at that, eyelids fluttering. Then her eyes opened fully and found him. He blinked once. Slow. Her gaze dropped to the cup in his hand, then rose again, steady, questioning. He crossed the room and set the cup down within her reach. She didn't move to take it, but she didn't look away either. Minutes passed like that, silent as snowfall. Then with a strange grace, she shifted upright, grimacing as her leg adjusted beneath the blanket. Her breath hitched, but she made no sound. Liam crouched near, reflexively offering his hands, unsure if it was help or habit. She didn't take them. Instead, she pointed, no, gestured, toward the wooden shelves on the wall. Slowly, with clawed fingers, she mimicked a motion. He followed her gaze, heart hammering. On the third shelf sat his father's old sketchbook, the one filled with cave symbols they never could decipher. He froze. She nodded. Then, without speaking, she pressed her palm flat against her stomach, and something shifted in the air, like the wind had turned, or the forest had started listening. Later that afternoon, as the cabin settled into its quiet rhythm of creaks and cooling wood, Liam pulled the sketchbook down with hesitant fingers. The cover was cracked and sun-faded, smelling faintly of ash and time. He hadn't opened it since the night they found his father's, pack torn in two beside that hollow cave, mouth up north. A few of the pages had smeared ink from rain. Others held drawings in thick charcoal lines, trees, totems, handprints. And then the symbols, etched again and again, variations of loops, eyes, and jagged marks like thunderbolts. She watched him from the cot, her breath shallow, eyes narrowed not in threat but focus. When he turned the page, she stirred, her hand lifted, finger pointing to one particular shape. Not the largest, not the most ornate, just a simple glyph, a circle split in half, vertical line cutting through like a spine. Liam looked from the page to her and back. Then she did something that turned the air inside the cabin cold. She repeated the symbol in the air with her claw, not drawn, but remembered, rehearsed, from her. He flipped through the pages again, frantic now. There it was, his father's final note beside a drawing of that exact symbol. Written in hasty, jagged pencil. It means child, but also key, a crossing. Liam didn't speak, didn't breathe. He looked at her belly, then her eyes. She didn't blink. Bigfoot saw. The sky outside darkened slightly, clouds gathering over the hills. A breeze found its way through the cracks in the logs. The smell shifted. Something earthy, unfamiliar. Not rot, not rain. A scent like birch and stone. She sat straighter, ears flicking. Her whole posture changed, alert but calm, as if a signal only she could sense had passed. Then she reached into the fur around her neck and pulled something small from within. A pendant of some kind, strung on sinew. It wasn't metal. It looked like bone, carved with the same circle and line glyph. She held it out to him. Liam hesitated. His fingers brushed hers as he took it. The cabin seemed to dim just slightly. Or maybe his thoughts did. He stared at the charm, feeling the texture beneath his skin. Not just a token, not just warning. It pulsed with meaning, like holding the last word of a forgotten language. Then she spoke. Not with voice, but with breath. A low hum barely sound at all. But it wrapped around him like a name, and for the first time since his father vanished, Liam felt something he couldn't explain. Not fear, not even awe. Recognition. Outside, the forest leaned in closer, listening. It started with a gesture. Small, deliberate. She tapped 2 fingers against her chest, then pointed toward the door. At first, Liam thought she wanted to leave. But when he opened it, she didn't move toward the exit. Instead, she waited, then tapped her chest again and pointed toward him. Her gaze was steady, like a teacher waiting for a slow student. He mimicked her movement clumsily, 2 fingers to the chest, then to her. She nodded once, slow. That was the beginning. In the hours that followed, she began showing him signs. Not just noises or pointing, but shapes drawn in the air with claws or scraped lightly into the dusty cabin floor. He watched, repeated, guessed. Sometimes she grunted in approval. Sometimes she huffed, amused or frustrated. When he showed her how to boil water using the old iron pot, she studied the flame like it was a wild animal in a cage. When he lit a match, her eyes narrowed, not with fear, but recognition. Fire wasn't new to her, only the method was. Then, just before dusk, came a sound that stopped them both. A whippoorwill's call, but sharp, broken, wrong. Her eyes snapped to the window, body tensing. Liam's hand found the rifle by instinct. He moved slowly to the door, peered out into the woods. Nothing stirred, but when he turned back, she was crouched low beside the fireplace, one hand on her belly, the other pressed flat against the floor. Then came something he hadn't expected. She beckoned him over and pointed to the ceiling rafters. He followed her eyes and saw nothing, at first. But when she reached up and scratched 3 lines into the soot-darkened beam above them, something in his mind clicked. The same 3 lines from his father's notebook. The mark of safe ground. He reached out and traced them with his own fingers. She watched him do it, and for the first time, she made a sound like breath drawn through stone. Not words, but the shape of meaning. A few minutes later, as the fire dimmed, she rose stiffly and motioned for him to follow her outside. Just beyond the cabin, she knelt, touched a patch of earth beneath a spruce, then held her hand to her ear. At first, he heard only the wind. Then he heard it, the trees answering not in voice, but in shifting rhythm. The whole forest breathing with her. He knelt beside her. They listened together. The wind picked up that evening, curling through the slats in the cabin walls like fingers searching for warmth. Liam sat near the fire, knees pulled up, hands clasped loosely, but his mind wasn't there. It was somewhere deeper, somewhere older. He tried not to think about the day his father died. For years, he told himself it didn't matter anymore. Men went missing in forests. That was the truth. That was nature. But it wasn't true. Not really. The truth had weight, and that weight had never left his shoulders. She sat across from him now, bandaged, alert, her legs still wrapped, her fur damp from melted snow brought in on her own shoulders. But she didn't look like a creature anymore. She looked like something that remembered what it meant to be watched. Liam reached for the journal. Not hers, his father's, the one he hadn't opened since the funeral. The first page still held a leaf, pressed dry and brittle. Beneath it, a note in his father's sharp, slanted hand. If I don't come back, remember the river doesn't end at the bend. He flipped past sketches, past blood-stained margins, until he found the page. A drawing of a face, not quite human, not quite beast. But those eyes, large, set deep, were unmistakable. I was 12, he said aloud, more to the fire than to her. He took me on a hunt, said it was time I learned the land. She didn't respond, but her gaze was on him now. Not impatient, waiting. He never came back. I ran. They found me near the bluffs, screaming about monsters. He looked up, lips twitching. Nobody believed me. Until now, silence settled like ash. Then she shifted, slowly, painfully, and reached into the pouch beneath her side. From it, she pulled a scrap of something folded, a piece of leather, scorched along the edge. She passed it to him. Liam opened it with cautious fingers. A name. Faded, nearly lost. His father's initials. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The room blurred, but then something strange happened. She leaned forward, ever so slightly, and pressed her forehead to the floor. It wasn't apology. It was acknowledgement. The truth had always been there. He just buried it in the dirt. And now, it was growing roots. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, but the air remained thick with the kind of stillness that warned of something nearing. Liam stepped out to gather firewood, boots sinking into fresh powder. Branches hung low, heavy with frost. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the distant cracking of ice. Only the sound of his own breath and the dull thud of wood against his gloves. He was halfway back to the cabin when he saw the tracks. 2 sets, human, too narrow and too clean to be his own. Coming in from the east, fresh, too fresh. He dropped the wood and ducked behind the brush, eyes scanning the tree line. A flash of movement, a jacket, olive drab, then another behind it. 2 men, rifles slung, voices low. One of them carried a map, crumpled and marked. They weren't locals. He waited until they passed, then slipped back toward the cabin, breath tight in his throat. Inside, she was already standing. Not fully upright, but alert. She had felt it too. Her hand rested on her belly, but her gaze locked on his. He didn't need to explain. He pushed the door closed softly and bolted it, then crossed to the window, peering through the slats. The 2 men were heading north, past the cabin for now, but not far. He knew the ridge they'd stop at, knew that they'd see the smoke next time the wind turned. He turned to her. They're close. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the center of the room and knelt. One hand traced a line on the floor, then another, forming a symbol he had seen before. An arch flanked by claw-like angles. A warning, a map, no, a choice. He understood then. If they found her here, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd do what he had once sworn he would, and they'd never know what they had destroyed. He moved fast, packed water, cloth, what food he had left. She stood without needing help. The injury hadn't healed, but it didn't matter. She was already moving. As he opened the back hatch, a gust of wind pushed through, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter. Far off, distorted by the trees. One of the men was closer now. Too close. She turned to him before stepping into the snow, and for the first time, she reached up, touched the side of his face, not with force, but with something like memory. Then she was gone into the trees, silent as the mist. Liam didn't follow, yet, but he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The storm rolled in fast, riding the dusk like a wave swallowing the treetops. By the time Liam caught up with her near the creek bed, the sky had already torn open. Rain hit the ground in sheets, soaking his coat, turning every step into a fight through mud and branches. She was there, crouched under a ledge of rock, breath short and eyes wide, not with fear, but with something rawer, older. Her hands pressed into the earth like she was trying to steady the world itself. Then he saw it, blood in the water, thin ribbons of red winding through the current. She shifted, turned slightly, And that's when he understood. Her hands were trembling. The pain that had shadowed her since the trap, since the exile, had returned. No, not returned. It had changed, grown sharper, rhythmic. She wasn't just hurt, she was in labor. He dropped beside her without a word. The ledge above them offered little shelter. But they had no time to search for more. Her breaths were short and fast now. Each one pulled like it had claws. Her eyes locked onto his. And in that gaze was both fury and trust. Two things he never thought could coexist in a single look. He fumbled through the bag, found the cloth, the knife, the flask of boiled water had packed earlier. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. She growled low, not at him, but at the storm, at the sky, at whatever ancient thing had chosen this moment to bring a life into the world. Then came the first contraction that buckled her. She gripped his arm with strength that should broken bone, but didn't. And he stayed, knees deep in mud, whispering nothing, because words didn't matter. Only presence, only warmth. Time bent, lightning split the sky. Then thunder cracked overhead so loud the trees themselves seemed to shudder. Her body arched once, then again, and then he saw it, a small shape, slick with birth and shadow, emerging slowly, impossibly, into the world. He moved without thought, caught the child in both hands. It didn't cry. It didn't wail. It opened its eyes, pale gray, almost silver, watching. Not beast, not human. Something new. And in that breathless moment between thunderclaps, Liam felt the rain stop, not because the storm had ended, but because something larger was happening, something that had waited years to arrive. She reached for the child, cradled it close, and the wind died around them like the forest itself was bowing. But far behind, deep through trees and dark, footsteps stirred again. They weren't alone. The rain hadn't stopped entirely, but it had softened into a whisper, falling in fine threads that slid over moss and stone. Liam knelt in the soaked earth, breath still shallow from what I'd just witnessed. The child in her arms was impossibly still, eyes wide, blinking only once, like it had already seen the world and decided it didn't need to scream to enter it. No fur, not entirely. A thin veil of down, more like dusted shadow than hair, covered its limbs. The skin beneath was smooth, not quite human, not quite beast. A gray that shimmered faintly under the clouded moonlight. She held it close, chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Her face was unreadable. Not joy, not pain. Something quieter, reverent. Liam leaned closer, not out of curiosity, but something heavier, responsibility. The child turned its head slightly, and their eyes met. For the briefest second, he felt the strange pulse of recognition again. The same thread he had felt when she looked at him, or when she first pointed to the glyph in his father's book. This was not just birth. It was remembering. He wiped his hands on his coat and scanned the surrounding trees. The storm had masked sound, but the forest held no true silence. In that moment, he realized something was missing. No owls, no insects. Even the creek had quieted, as if nature itself was leaning in, watching. She shifted, cradling the child higher. Then she reached toward the pouch at her hip and pulled something out. A carved token, bone or ivory, etched with the same circle-split symbol. She pressed it into Liam's palm and closed his fingers over it. No words, no signs. But then she looked down at the child, then back at him, and he understood what she was asking. Not to name it, not to claim it, to protect it. Before he could speak, a sound broke the edge of the moment. Not loud, but clear. A twig snapped under weight. Not animal weight, human. Boots. They both turned at once. She stood slowly, one hand still cradling the newborn, the other touching Liam's shoulder with urgency. He rose to his feet, mind racing. They had to move. Now. But before they could vanish into the trees, the child reached a hand toward the rain, and the water impossibly paused in midair, clinging to its palm like glass. Liam's breath caught, and in that instant, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. They didn't stop running until the trees grew so thick The moonlight could no longer reach the ground. Liam's lungs burned, his boots soaked and dragging, but she moved ahead with uncanny steadiness, cradling the child close against her chest. The rain had eased, yet every gust of wind seemed to carry whispers. Real or imagined, he couldn't tell anymore. Somewhere behind them, the men would be closing in. But that wasn't what haunted him now. It was the way the water had clung to the baby's hand. Not by accident, not from heat or static, but as if the rain had recognized it. They reached a low outcropping of rock, shaped like a fallen tooth, and ducked beneath its ledge. She knelt first, easing down with care. The baby did not cry. It hadn't made a single sound since birth, but its eyes stayed wide open, unblinking, locked onto the dark. Then she reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out something wrapped in bark cloth. She unfolded it slowly. A stone, no larger than Liam's palm, dark and veined with lines of silver. But it was water carved into it that froze him. He'd seen it before, years ago, on the wall of the cave where they'd found his father's gear. A symbol etched into stone so deep it had outlived whatever made it. The eye split down the center, the arc beneath it like a cradle or a wound. The same symbol his father had drawn over and over again in the margins of his journal, always with the same question scrawled beneath. Is it prophecy or memory? She placed the stone in his lap, then pressed her hand to the child's chest, and then to her own. Liam understood. Not all the details, not yet, but enough to make his skin tighten. The child wasn't just a birth. It was a return. He thought of the strange dreams he used to have as a boy. Visions of something in the trees, calling not with voice, but with shape and shadow. He thought of the glyphs he couldn't explain, the way animals had grown silent around his father, the quiet reverence in her every movement. This wasn't a freak of nature. It was a bloodline, one meant to bridge something long divided. And then, just as he reached to hand the stone back, the baby turned its gaze directly on him again. For the first time, its mouth opened. But no cry came, only breath, and it sounded just like the wind before a storm. The moment they stepped into the clearing, the wind changed. It wasn't just colder. It moved with intention, curling around trunks and stones like it remembered where it had come from. The baby stirred in her arms, eyes alert again, too quiet for a newborn. Liam could feel it pressing in from all directions now, not a presence, but many, watching. Then, without warning, they appeared. From the dark between trees, figures emerged. Tall, heavy, silent. No footfalls, no growls, only the weight of them bending the air. At first, Liam thought they were shadows cast wrong by the moon, but their eyes glinted in the dim light, and each moved with a slow, devastating certainty. Bigfoot, more than had ever imagined, more than any of the stories dared whisper. They fanned out in a semicircle around them, not rushing, surrounding. Their fur was dark with moisture, their faces expressionless, but he could feel the judgment. One stepped forward, older, its body broader, posture rigid with something like ceremony. It looked at her first, then the child, then him. Its gaze held none of the awe he felt, only warning. She stepped slightly ahead of Liam, shielding the infant, standing with the last of her strength. Her voice didn't rise. There was no sound at all, but her stance said what he could not. This child lives. Then came the sound Hyde dreaded, a low rumble, not from their throats, but from beneath the ground. The elder moved closer, raised its hand, stopped just short of the baby, and then it paused, because the child had reached forward, not with fear, but intention. Its fingers brushed the elder's palm, and the elder froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the sky above them rippled, just once, as if the air itself had exhaled. The elder looked down at its hand where the baby had touched it. Something faint, like ash or frost, had bloomed across its fur. It stepped back, and the others followed, but not in retreat, in reverence. They parted slowly, leaving a path through the forest. The message was clear. They were allowed to go, not accepted, not safe, but spared. Liam didn't breathe again until they were gone, swallowed by trees. And even then, something in him stayed frozen, because he knew what that moment meant. If the others had come seconds later, or not at all, the child might not have survived the night. And now the world had felt its presence, which meant it would come looking. Liam stood at the edge of the clearing long after the others had gone, soaked to the bone, the carved stone still warm in his hand. The forest had returned to stillness, but it was a different kind of quiet, charged, watching, full of unspoken decisions. The woman, no, not woman, not beast, stood before him, child in arms, her breath steady, unreadable. Behind her, the woods opened like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. She turned to him one last time. Her gaze held no plea, no softness, only certainty. This was goodbye. He knew it before she stepped away, before the shadows reclaimed her form, before the child turned its head once, just once, as if to mark him in its memory. The rain began again, soft and slow. He didn't follow. Couldn't. Then the second sound came, boots crunching snow. The little crack of branches breaking under weight, not hers. Liam spun toward the tree line just as two figures emerged, rifles drawn, faces pale in the moonlight. The same men. The hunters, their eyes locked on the trail she had taken, and without a word, they started forward. Liam stepped between them and the path. One of them raised his rifle halfway. Move! But Liam didn't. She's gone, he said. His voice was calm. Final. There's nothing out there but trees. The younger one hesitated. The older narrowed his eyes. You saw her, didn't you? The thing. Liam shook his head. No monsters here? They stared for a long moment, the tension humming like wire. Then slowly, one of them lowered his weapon. The other didn't. Not at first. Until Liam added, if you're lucky, you'll leave this place remembering nothing. The words weren't a threat. They were a warning. Finally, the man stepped back. They turned, said nothing, left. Liam watched until their shapes melted into fog. Only then did he allow his shoulders to fall. The weight hadn't left, but it had shifted, become something older, heavier. He didn't go after her. She was never his to find. But in his pocket, he kept the pendant. And in his chest, he kept the silence. Long after, when the storms had passed and spring returned, he would tell no one what happened in those woods, not because he was afraid no one would believe him, but because, deep down, he knew. Some truths aren't meant to be shared, only carried. Some stories are not written to be believed. They are meant to be remembered. Not with proof or logic, but with feeling. Carried in the marrow of those quiet moments between dusk and nightfall, when the trees lean in a little closer, and the wind sounds almost like it's trying to speak. What begins as myth doesn't always stay myth. Sometimes it grows roots in the heart. Sometimes it finds breath in those who have suffered, who have lost, who have dared to see something more than what the world permits. This is a story not just of wilderness, but of what it means to witness. To cross a boundary not drawn by maps or fences, but by fear. Fear of the unknown, of the different, of the truth we're not ready to hold. And in doing so, to find that what we were afraid of might be the very thing that teaches us how to feel again. There is something deeply human in reaching out toward what we don't understand. In offering compassion before certainty, in staying when running would be easier. We forget sometimes that healing does not require words, only presence. That trust can be built without language. That life, no matter how strange its form, has a right to exist, to be protected, to be loved. Nature does not ask for permission to evolve. It remembers. It adapts. It weaves past into present until the line between legend and memory blurs. What we call monsters may have once been messengers. What we exile in fear might have once held the key to reconnection. Not only with the wild, but with the parts of ourselves we buried to survive. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle in all of this, that we can still change. That even after everything we've done to the earth, to each other, there remains a path back, Not to what we were, but to what we could become. Softer, wiser, ready. We don't always need answers. Sometimes, all we need is a reason to stay, to bear witness, to hold the silence between heartbeats, and know something sacred lies there. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart to this journey. If this story moved you in any way, if it stirred questions or memories, or even just a stillness you didn't expect, please consider leaving a comment. Share your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, tales that explore the space between myth and meaning, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and stay close. Because somewhere out there, beneath the trees, another story is already beginning.